You awoke with the cold weight of the tatami pressing against your weary skin, the persistent scent of scorched rice lingering in the heavy, stale air of the chamber. Distant, dragging footsteps echoed slowly down the corridor, reminding you that the time to prepare the shogun's meal was drawing near. Your calloused fingers slid over the rough planks as you separated the simple utensils, almost silently cleaning the worn blade of your knife, aware that a single mistake could mean your death sentence. The sharp smell of bitter tea mixed with the sweat soaked into the wood of the humble kitchen. You repeated the tired motion of washing rice, the constant touch of cold water against your anxious hands, the methodical clinking of ceramics neatly arranged. Each movement became a monotonous dance, a cold and relentless routine, as you prepared to serve the meal that might hide poison and suspicion. The invisible tension filled the dense air, and you felt the weight of the shogun's paranoia whispering within every shadow, reminding you that survival depended on your caution and the quiet luck that accompanied you. You wondered how different this was from modern mornings, when a distracted glance at a smartphone replaces the slow, deliberate rituals of your current task. Yet here, the ritual itself was your life, each step measured, each breath taken with care, like the ink flowing steadily in calligraphy, slow and precise. The dim light filtered through paper screens, muted and pale, painting everything in washed-out hues of gray and brown. The sounds of the estate were muffled, except for those footsteps, dragged out and rhythmic, a slow metronome marking time as you arranged grains and bowls. The aroma of the burnt rice blended with the faint bitterness of tea steeped too long, curling like whispers around your senses. You washed the rice again. The water was cold, biting your skin gently as it passed over each grain, slipping through your fingers as you carried on, methodically. You lined the bowls in a perfect row, the sound of porcelain tapping softly against wood, becoming a vague, hypnotic murmur. A sudden nuance crept in, a subtle shift. From the corridor came a breathy rustle, softer than the dragging feet, almost imperceptible but distinct. Your heart slowed, muscles tensed slightly, and all at once the stale air felt heavier, as though the room itself was holding its breath alongside you. Before Morpheus takes you completely, make sure you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappears, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy stories. Take a soft like, as gentle as a pillow. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You felt the cold shiver trail up your spine as the faint rustling in the corridor softened into a mere whisper against the wooden floorboards. Your breath was shallow, the steady rhythm of your pulse echoing behind your ears like distant thunder beneath calm skies. The light filtering through the paper screens faltered, casting your shadow in wavering shapes that dissolved into the muted tones of the humble kitchen. Your fingers, once trembling with anxious energy, settled into the slow, deliberate motions of placing the bowls precisely along the narrow plank. The smell of scorched rice clung stubbornly to the room, wrapping around your senses in a warm but unsettling embrace. You traced the worn grain of the tatami beneath your palms, its rough fibers a constant reminder of the small world you were contained in, a world measured not in time, but in careful, repeated acts. The bitter tang of over-steeped tea lingered like a silent witness to your hours, its austerity pressing on the corners of your mind. Each bowl was arranged with exacting care. Your hand brushed against the smooth wood, catching the soft glimmer of the late morning sun. The air was thick with unspoken tension. You could almost feel the shogun's watchful gaze, heavy and unrelenting, pressing into your back through the thin walls. The knowledge that a single fumble might unleash a wave of suspicion weighed upon you like an iron brand. A slow breath escaped your lips as you lifted the knife, its blade still dull and smudged with stains from days past. The act of cleaning it was less about necessity and more a sacred ritual, calming a storm within you that threatened to unravel the fabric of your focus. Your fingertips traced the length of the blade, mindful not to disturb a single speck. The rough wood underneath whispered faint echoes as you pressed against the sink's basin, water trickling in a thin, steady stream. Your steps shifted, careful and measured, as the distant footsteps dragged nearer, a muted metronome giving rhythm to your every movement. The corridor seemed narrower than before, its shadows folding tighter, pressing in with quiet menace. You inched towards it, toes barely grazing the grain of the floor. The air turned, heavier, cold and thick like a wet cloth, and you became painfully aware of each sensation. The chill creeping up your sleeves, the faint ragged edge of your own breath, the slight shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. The bowls waited in their perfect line, untouched, fragile like the silence that held the room suspended. You bent low, steadying your breath, and started the ritual again, washing the rice. Cool water slipped through your fingers, silky and insistent. It was a rhythm you could lose yourself in. The grains rolled softly, whispering secrets into the clear liquid, and the fluids slipped away to disappear silently down the drain. This repetition was a refuge, a moment safe from the lurking dangers, even if only for a breath. A faint creak echoed from beyond the shoji screens, barely audible but piercing in its stillness. Your heart stilled for a fraction, suspended between beats, as your gaze flickered to the faint light filtering in. The corridor seemed empty, yet the air throbbed with the scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic, a vague trace that you could not place. Your fingers tightened around the edge of the basin, cold sweat slicking your palms. The moments stretched out, thin and taut. As you straightened, you glimpsed a hint of movement, a slow and deliberate shadow crossing the threshold of your vision. It was just a shift in the light, or was it? The shadows at the edge of the room deepened, pooling like ink across the wooden beams. Your breath slowed, each inhalation tasting of dust and distant rain. The tea's bitterness seemed to swell in your mouth, thickening the stillness and drawing a veil of quiet dread over your thoughts. You found yourself returning again to the bowl of rice, lifting it, turning it carefully, and laying it down once more in place. The cold porcelain pressed gently against your fingertips, fragile as a sigh. Each motion extended, lingering in the air, creating a chant without words. The world outside the kitchen faded to a dull murmur, the rhythm of your careful actions filling the space with fragile certainty. Farther down the hall, a soft murmur rose and fell, like the sigh of bamboo in the wind. Somewhere, deep within the walls of the estate, a faint bell tolled, a sound heavy with age, stretched long through the dense air. The melody seemed to brush your skin, slow and deliberate, a gentle reminder of the passing moment. You welcomed the small flicker of warmth this fleeting sound offered, a quiet hope in the gloom. Your hands moved to the tea kettle resting on the stove, its blackened surface cool against your touch. You lifted the ladle with reverence, pouring the bitter liquid into waiting cups. The steam rose, swirling like the thin mist of early morning fields, curling around your fingers and drawing a thin veil across your vision. You watched it drift slowly upward, dissolving silently in the heavy air, before bending down again to survey your work. The meal was nearly ready. You turned to the corridor once more, the footsteps now distant but rhythmic, a slow, deliberate pacing, as if time itself were holding its breath, stretching each second like a string pulled taut. The faint light from the hallway flickered, dimming, before settling into a soft, steady glow that caressed the edges of the room. You found your gaze drawn to the far end of the corridor, where a faint silhouette shimmered behind the paper screens. Barely there, but unmistakably present. Your breath caught in your throat. There was no sound, no rustle, only the weight of expectation hanging thick in the air. The world seemed to narrow until there was nothing but the shared silence between you and the shadow. A slow, steady pulse thrummed in your veins, part caution, part something older, deeper. You knew the meal must be perfect, that every gesture, every sensation, every measured step could mean the difference between keeping your head and losing it. The shadows crept closer to the edges of the kitchen now, folding you into their cold embrace, whispering of secrets that might never be spoken aloud. And just as you dared to steady your hands again, the paper screen trembled slightly, a whisper of movement that sent a shiver racing down your spine. Something unseen but felt, brushing the very edge of your awareness, waiting patiently in the silence that stretched before the next step. You held your breath as the paper screen's slight tremble faded into the stillness, the air thick with a heavy, expectant silence that pressed hard against your chest. Each slow, deliberate breath you drew tasted of stale wood smoke and bitter tea, lingering between your lips like shadows sprawling across the tatami beneath you. Your hands remained unmoving for a heartbeat longer than usual, the bowls resting firmly in their perfect row, fragile islands of porcelain amid the muted hues of the kitchen. Outside, the faint echo of distant footsteps dwindled. Further into the corridor's dim recesses, retreating but never fully disappearing, like a warning threat softened to a whisper. The corridor's narrowing walls seemed to press inward, their surfaces absorbing the faint, flickering sunlight and swallowing its warmth. You could almost feel the presence of shadowed eyes watching, unblinking, lurking just beyond the flimsy paper screens, cloaked in the trembling quietude that filled the space. Your fingers slid back to the edge of the basin, the cold water running clear and steady as you returned to the ritual. Slow, methodical, unhurried. The grains of rice slipped between your skin, cold and smooth, like tiny pebbles beneath a gentle stream, their silence broken only by the faint clink of porcelain as you shifted the bowls just so. The water slipped away, pulling the secrets of the rice with it, casting them quietly down the drain, leaving your hands damp and chilled. The sharp scent of scorched rice lingered, mixing with the bitterness of tea and a faint metallic tang that pricked at your nostrils, refusing to be ignored. As you leaned over, tracing the grain of the tatami with a trembling fingertip, a soft murmur brushed through the estate, like the caress of distant wind through bamboo leaves. The sound was subtle, a sigh, an exhale, not quite voice, not quite breath. The wooden walls seemed to absorb it, stretching it thin across the narrow hallways, weaving it into the already tense atmosphere, adding weight where moments before there had been nearly none. Your eyes flicked up toward the corridor, now cloaked in a fog of pale shifting light, shadows pooling in irregular patterns that resembled ink spilled on parchment. The silence was thick, enough to hold your handprint against the washing basin, a quiet invitation and a warning tangled together. Your breath slowed, deliberate and measured, matching the pulse thrumming quietly beneath your ribs, a low, steady drum, barely audible beneath the cold rhythm of the house. You reached again for the worn knife on the counter, fingers grazing the dull, scarred metal with reverence and caution. The blade, smeared with remnants of forgotten meals and slow hours, caught what little light filtered in, gleaming faintly with a tired promise. With tender care, you press the soft cloth to its edge, sliding each stroke with patience, erasing marks without haste. The slow, repetitive motion steadied the fluttering storm within you, a small anchor against the invisible tide of fear rising in the silence. The overhead lantern flickered, casting pale orbs of trembling light that danced slowly on the walls like restless spirits. The bitterness of long-steeped tea coated your tongue again, dry and stubborn, grounding you in this fragile moment. Outside the kitchen, a faint ringing emerged, soft, aged notes drawn out like weary prayers, reverberating through the wooden skeleton of the estate. They sank into your bones, stirring an unexpected flicker of warmth amid the cold tension, a fleeting ember of calm. You shifted your weight, stepping lightly to the side, toes barely touching the floorboards, as if afraid your presence might shatter the fragile stillness. The bowls waited patiently, lined like silent sentinels, reflecting bits of silver light as you moved closer. Each step echoed softly, a slow, cautious rhythm that matched the guarded beat of your heart. The air thickened further, weighty with quiet suspicion and unseen eyes. Your gaze lingered on the shadowed threshold, for the paper screen shivered once more. This time the motion was deliberate, a slow, undulating wave that rippled through the thin fabric, like a breath held for centuries, finally released. You dared not look away. The corridor beyond seemed to widen, swallowing light and sound alike. An endless tunnel of secrets slipping beyond your reach. The faint hint of smoke, mixed with a sharper metallic scent that stirred your senses, pulling your focus like a distant thread, tugging you closer. You found yourself drawn back to the task at hand, fingers curling around the ladle resting beside the kettle. The metal felt cool and heavy, grounding you once more. Your hand raised the ladle slowly, the bitter liquid swirling as you poured it into the waiting cups, steam trailing like thin ghosts, whispering away into the thick air. The heat brushed against your skin in gentle waves, a quiet contrast to the cold dread creeping beneath your ribs. The bowls stood ready, the meal prepared with the exacting care that patience demanded. Yet, beneath the surface, unease coiled like a silent serpent, reminding you that nothing here was ever truly certain. Every polished gesture, every measured breath was a fragile thread holding you fast against the slow creeping dark of suspicion. As you turned once again toward the corridor, your eyes caught a flicker at the end, an indistinct silhouette barely shifting, half swallowed by the folds of shadow. You froze, the world narrowing until it was only you and that wavering form, caught in suspended silence. The breath in your chest weighed heavy, your pulse a muted roar beneath the steady echo. And then, almost imperceptibly, the silhouette blinked, a single pulse of shadow that vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving behind the faintest whisper of silk against wood. The paper screen quivered again, thinner now, a fragile veil trembling in the hush of a secret waiting to unfold, one that would change everything the moment it dared to cross the threshold. You held your breath as the paper screen's faint quiver dissolved once more into the stillness, the air tightening around you like a silk cord slowly drawn taut. The shadows had folded back, retreating, yet never fully gone, leaving the dim kitchen lingering in a balance both delicate and fragile. Your heartbeat thumped softly beneath your ribs, a quiet drum in the vast silence, urging you to move with caution, yet invisible haste. Your fingers brushed again against the worn edge of the basin, feeling the chill of the water steady beneath your touch. The grains of rice slipped slow and steady through your hands like tiny cool stones, each one a whisper of necessity in this endless ritual. You rotated the bowl, the sound of porcelain tapping lightly against wood, soft and rhythmic, a quiet soundtrack in the hush. The scent of burnt rice persisted, mingling with the faint metallic tang you had noticed before, elusive but unmistaken, curling like smoke through the still air. Stretching your arms, you let your shoulders ease from the knot of tension tightening along your spine. But your senses remained sharp, alert to the subtle rustle of cloth, the nearly imperceptible shift of breath beyond the fragile paper screens. The corridor seemed to hold its own breath, the muted echoes stretching further toward a distant knot of silence, thicker and darker than the spaces shaped by light. You felt the weight of the Shogun's gaze, pervasive and unseen, pressing relentlessly against the fragile walls, reminding you that every moment was a thread in the fragile fabric holding your fate. Your hands moved to the kettle, resting quietly on the fire's edge. The blackened metal was cool and rough beneath your fingertips as you lifted it slightly, careful not to disturb the faint crackle of the drying wood beneath. You poured a small measure of tea into a cup, watching the thin, bitter steam curl upward in slow spirals that blurred the outline of your fingers. The bitter warmth of the tea filled you briefly, an anchor amid the creeping cold that sought to claim your calm. You set the cup down with deliberate gentleness and returned to the bowls, smoothing the rice beds with the tip of your finger, spreading each grain with care. A painstaking attention to the smallest detail. The faint murmur of movement reached your ears again, softer now, a slow scraping that tugged at your focus without breaking the trance of your task. Your breath tightened as your eyes darted subtly toward the corridor, where shadows broadened and retreated with a silent deliberation. A trace of smoke wavered at the edges of your vision, thin and sharp like an unspoken warning. Your body tensed like a drawn bow, muscles coiling against the tide of unseen threats. Still, you forced yourself to return to the rhythm, the washing, spreading, the soft clink of porcelain, the soothing elements in this storm of uncertainty. Raising the knife once more, you took up the slow, sacred ritual of sharpening it. The blade was dull and uneven, layered with the faint scars of past tasks. But your fingers moved with unwavering patience, smoothing the edges with strokes long and fluid. Each pass of cloth across metal was a silent prayer, a stubborn beacon against the gathering dread. The slender beam of light filtering through the rice paper screens flickered slightly, casting fleeting shapes across the blade's surface. Reflections like ghostly whispers in the dim. Farther along the hallway, a bell tolled softly, a low, ancient sound drawn out through the wood like a slow breath. The sound seeped past the walls, folding gently around the edges of your consciousness. It was a fragile moment, a faint pulse of warmth shimmering in the muted air, offering a whisper of hope amid the tension that pressed resolutely against you. You bent low, steadying your breath again, fingertips drifting over the rough grain of the tatami. The texture was prickly and comforting, grounding you against the surging current of anxious thoughts pressing at the edges of your mind. The air was thick now, with the twin scents of oversteeped tea and burning wood, along with the sharper metallic note, like rust barely awakening from a deep sleep that lingered stubbornly beneath everything else. The bowls were arranged immaculately, still and expectant. You could feel their fragile presence, like silent sentinels bearing witness to each measured moment. And then, as you adjusted the last bowl with slow precision, a barely perceptible shift caught your eye. The paper screen at the corridor's far end fluttered again, this time with a deliberate, wave-like motion as if stirred by an unseen hand, brushing softly against silk. Your breath faltered sharply, heart hammering in low, urgent beats that seemed too loud for the quiet room. The shadows thickened, pooling dark and deep, swallowing the edges of the space you inhabited. The faint outline of a figure emerged, shrouded in the gloom, its presence a slow and steady pulse against the fragile stillness around you. You remained rooted to the spot, senses straining as something colder than the night itself seemed to settle in the space between you and the shadow. The crisis was not sudden, not violent, but slow and inevitable, a tightening coil drawing closer with measured patience. Your hands trembled just beneath your sleeves, refusing to betray the storm within. The faint, brittle scrape of fabric brushing the floor whispered, "The arrival of something unseen." And for a moment, suspended between the last drop of doubt and the first breath of certainty, you felt the quiet fold of fate tighten its grip. Then, with the faintest exhale of air and a final shiver that passed like a ghost through the room, the paper screen slid open just an inch, a narrow slit in the veil between safety and the unknown, revealing nothing but a darkness dense and waiting. like a silent promise whispered by shadows yet to come. The paper screen's narrow slit closed silently, folding the shadowed passage back into itself like a quiet exhale into still air. Your breath lingered heavier in the hollow room, the faint scent of scorched rice mingling with something sharper, the elusive metallic sharpness lingering like a ghost at the edge of your senses. The tatami beneath your knees felt suddenly firmer, the rough fibers anchoring you as the silence stretched, pulled taut between heartbeats. You traced a slow circle with your palm, fingers pressing into the worn weave of the straw mat. The dim morning light flickered softly through the rice paper, casting faint, irregular patterns like the water ripple of a slow, steady stream. Each shadow seemed to shiver slightly before settling again into place, a hesitant reminder of the quiet tension folded into the very walls. Your hands slid back to the basin, cool water trickling over skin still slick with the morning's ritual. You lifted a bowl gently, the cold porcelain whispering against your fingertips as you adjusted its place. The slow rhythm of small movements was your tether, an island of control in a sea of uncertainty. A distant bell tolled once more, rich and weary, the sound drifting lazily through the estate's labyrinthine corridors. The notes stretched long and hollow, a soft call beneath the weight of silence. Your throat tightened as the familiar sound folded around your thoughts, evoking a strange mixture of calm and cold dread. It was a reminder of time's slow march, a countdown measured not in seconds, but in subtle shifts, like the faint, persistent scraping of footsteps no longer heard but felt. The room's shadows deepened, folding inward like ink spilling across old parchment. You shifted your gaze to the corner where the paper screens met, the light dimming into dusky grays. The faint creak of floorboards from beyond the threshold pulled at your attention, thin and hesitant, as if the house itself exhaled in quiet anxiety. Your pulse slowed, fingers curling subtly around the ladle resting near the blackened kettle. The bitter tea steam wound upward again, lazy and curling, its heat an odd comfort against the lingering chill in the air. Your eyes watched the bowls once more, lined in patient obedience, as though they waited silently for the Shogun's gaze to fall upon them. You bent low, brushing the tiny grains with tenderness, each one a fleeting promise that nothing was yet broken. The sound of porcelain, softly tapping wood, blended rhythmically with water, slipping down the basin's lip. In that steady pattern, you found a fragile sanctuary, the stillness drawing your senses away from the heavy looming dread. A faint rustle passed beyond the paper screen, subtler this time, like a breath barely stirred by the weight of invisible wings. Your heartbeat flattened, thudding steady and slow beneath your ribs as the faint movement lingered in your mind's eye. A thin thread of smoke curled faintly in the stale kitchen air, twisting upwards, then vanishing. The sharp bite of bitter tea and charred grains wove together, layering the atmosphere with a dense, quiet unease. Your hand drifted to the knife, lying still on the counter, its dulled edge shimmering weakly under the filtered light. You lifted the soft cloth once again and began the ritual. Slow strokes gliding down the blade, like water smoothing driftwood. The rhythm steadied you. A ritual, yes, but also a fragile shield against the gathering shadows. The blade's surface caught the faint glow, sending shards of pale silver flickering like distant stars blinking through a misted window. The corridor beyond exhaled a deeper silence, stretched thin by the afternoon's heat filtering through the wooden lattices. A faint murmur rose and fell like a steady breath, the soft sighing of sliding screens, the imperceptible scrape of footsteps that might have been imagined, but held the weight of ominous promise. Your breath caught, held fast, as the faintest silhouette stepped from the dark recesses. A slow, deliberate pulse in the shadows. This figure did not move swiftly, but rather glided, as if carried by the weight of silent patience. The edges of its form blurred into the darkness, a shifting veil between certainty and the unseen. You steadied yourself, feeling the slow, tightening coil of dread curling along your spine, the cold question of what might come next, pressing against your will to remain calm. Your fingers trembled only slightly as you slid the paper screen open just a fraction more, an inch, barely allowed, a narrow sliver of vulnerability between the dim kitchen and the corridor's shadowed breath. The faint scent of smoke deepened, mingled now with a hint of something iron-like, raw and unforgiving. You shifted your weight soundlessly, the worn tatami beneath absorbing your presence in near silence. As your gaze met the abyss beyond the screen, the silhouette seemed to hesitate, a pause heavy with unspoken intent. The silence stretched thin again, the fragile moment lingering like the last drop of water poised before it falls. And then, from the breath of stillness, a single soft sound, a whisper of cloth against wood, fragile and fleeting, brushed the edge of your awareness. You held your breath once more, the room narrowing to the space between you and the mysterious shape. Outside, distant bells tolled slowly, each note a thread, weaving tension deeper into the fabric of the day. Your heartbeat rose with the slow certainty that what waited beyond the paper screen would unravel the delicate balance you fought so hard to maintain. And as the paper screen shifted just an instant more, revealing a flash of darkness, dense and waiting, like a secret long held in quiet shadow, you knew this narrow crack in your world was only the beginning. The paper screen had slipped back into place, folding the corridor's shadows into a silent shroud. Your breath lingered heavy in your chest, steady but thick, each inhale ripe with the lingering scent of burnt rice and the sharper sting of cold metal hidden somewhere in the air. The tatami beneath your knees was unyielding, its rough surface a tactile anchor, as the quiet stretched taut between your racing thoughts. A subtle vibration hummed under your skin, a slow pulse tying you back to the fragile present. You traced a languid circle with your palm on the woven straw mat, feeling the coarse ridges brush against your fingertips like whispers of the place's memory. The faint morning light flickered hesitantly through the rice paper, casting delicate patterns that floated briefly before melting back into muted grays and browns. Shadows seemed to quiver momentarily, as if unsettled by the sudden stillness that now pressed uninvited into the room. Your hands dipped again to the basin, cool water running clear and steady, smooth surface, a faint echo of your careful heartbeat. The soft tap as it settled back into the neat row was a whispered punctuation between the quiet breaths filling the space. The scent of scorched rice clung stubbornly to the air, mingling with the bitter trace of oversteeped tea and that elusive metallic tang, sharp and unsettled, curling like smoke around the steady rhythm of your motions. You stretched your arms beneath loose sleeves, feeling the tension unwinding from the tight knots along your spine. Yet your senses remained keen, alert to the lightest shift. A breath barely moved, the faintest swish of cloth against wood that set your nerves alight. The corridor seemed to hold its breath alongside you, swallowing sound and light in folds that pressed in, a narrowing channel of quiet menace. You could almost sense the Shogun's unseen gaze, heavy and unyielding, clinging like a shadow at your back. Your fingers curled around the worn ladle resting near the blackened kettle, the metal cold but steady in your palm. You raised it slowly, the bitter tea swirling in muted spirals beneath the fragile cup. Steam twirled upward, ghost-like, blurring the edges of the dim room before vanishing, a delicate dance against the thick air's slow, relentless weight. The bitter warmth brushed your skin in gentle waves, a small grounding comfort amid the creeping cold that gnawed beneath your ribs. You bent low to the rice bowls, the grains dry and light beneath your fingers as you spread them with painstaking care. The soft clinking of porcelain against wood became a nearly hypnotic refrain, a fragile rhythm to hold fast against the silence stretching finer by the breath. Outside a bell tolled once more, low, deep, and hollow, its ancient notes rippling slowly through wooden beams and paper screens, sinking quietly through your bones like distant thunder rolling beneath a slate sky. Your muscles coiled slightly as a fresh, subtle sound teased your awareness, a gentle scraping, subdued and hesitant, carried softly by the air beyond the thin paper walls. Your breath slowed, Each inhale, measured, matching the pulse thudding faintly beneath your ribs. The corridor teased at your sight, shadows pooling and twisting as though alive, brushing faint tendrils of smoke that seemed to dance just beyond the edge of your vision. Careful and deliberate, you retrieved the worn knife from the counter. Its edge was dull beneath worn layers, stained with histories too slow to recount. The cloth slid against metal in long, fluid strokes, smoothing, erasing, a slow prayer cast in silence. Pale light flickered through the paper, casting fleeting glimmers across the blade's surface, a quiet constellation of promises shimmering in the dim kitchen. The corridor exhaled a deeper stillness, stretched thin beneath the afternoon's waning light, filtering cautiously through lattices. A slow murmur rose, like bamboo leaves, brushed gently by the wind, weaving tension into the atmosphere's heavy fabric. Your breath hitched as a shape emerged just beyond the veil, indistinct, gliding silently between shadow and light. It moved without haste, carried by a weight of timeless patience, edges blurred like smoke curling softly into dusk. Rooted to the moment, you felt the cold tendrils of apprehension curl along your spine, a coil tightening with measured intent. Your hands trembled subtly beneath your sleeves, steadying a storm beneath the surface. The paper screen shifted again, an inch wider this time, fracturing the space between safety and the unknown. The sharp scent of smoke deepened, mingled now with a steely tang, raw, unyielding, prickling the back of your throat. The dark shape hesitated, a breath held long and deep, hanging between the quiet spaces of shadowed wood and flickering light. Silence drew taut around you as soft cloth brushed floorboards. A whisper suspended in the heavy air, delicate and fragile, yet charged with unspoken purpose. Your breath caught tight in your throat as the figure paused beyond the screen, a slow, deliberate pulse in the shadowed corridor. The fading light flickered once before folding deeper into gloom. Every instinct screamed caution, but you remained motionless, a fragile sentinel standing at the boundary. And then, without sound, without warning, the screen slid open just a fraction more, revealing a hollow darkness dense and waiting, a secret beckoning quietly from the depths. Your heart surged with a cold certainty. This small crack in your world was no mere chance. Something long restrained had begun to move, poised to cross the threshold and unravel the fragile threads of your careful existence. The faintest thread of light that lingered beyond the paper screen dwindled into a fragile shadow, drawn back as if swallowing its breath. You remained still, rooted by the slow, deliberate beat of your own heart, each pulse a quiet drum beneath the hushed tension. The kitchen's stale air pressed tightly around you, thick with the sharp scent of scorched rice, lingering stubbornly. Mingling indistinctly with the bitter linger of oversteeped tea and the metallic whisper that lingered just beyond reach. Your fingers traced slow circles on the worn tatami beneath your palms, feeling the rough ridges press softly, a faint anchor against the swelling tide of nerves. The faded light danced in dim patterns, wavering quietly through the rice paper, shaping mottled grays and muted browns that folded like tired whispers across the walls. The room seemed weighed down by silence, stretched thin like old cloth, yet alive with the memory of the last faint movement beyond the screen. You breathed deliberately, slow, textured draws that brushed dry air across your lips, each one grounding you against the creeping gnaw of dread. The bowls, aligned in unyielding rows, seemed to watch in quiet patience as you bent low once more, your hands moving with exacting care over the cool porcelain. The cold edges trembled beneath your touch, fragile as winter's breath, their muted clink against the wood floor, a soft, rhythmic thread that unfurled gently in the stillness. You sifted through the rice grains again, each one slick with cool water, sliding slowly between your fingers like icy pebbles tumbling across a gentle stream. The repetitive motion became a mantra, pulling you deep into a fragile calm tucked between the beats of anxiety. Outside, the estate's shadows stretched long and still, swallowing the distant echoes of footsteps that had not yet faded from memory. The corridor held its breath, a silent corridor folded in on itself, dense with unspoken weights and hidden eyes just out of sight. You caught a faint rustle from beyond the screen, a hesitant breath of fabric, rushing wood, soft enough to go unnoticed, except for the way your chest tightened, your muscles folding inward like drawn silk. Rising slowly, you reached for the worn knife, its blade dulled by countless careful motions, its metal edge birthing a cold gleam in the dim light. The touch of the cloth against the blade was smooth and steady, each slow pass a deliberate stroke of patience. The blade whispered soft promises to your fingers, a fragile shield in a fortress of shadow and silence. The slow rhythm of sharpening eased the tension tethering your thoughts, your breath falling into sync with the faint flicker of the lantern overhead. A soft bell rang, low and distant, its weary tones curling through the wooden bones of the estate like a muted prayer. The notes stretched long and slow, casting a gentle warmth across your skin, a fleeting ember smoldering against the cold insistence of waiting. The sound seemed to fold you into a fragile moment, a breath between moments, soft and fleeting as dusk's quiet sigh. You shifted toward the kettle, its blackened surface cool against your palm, solid and familiar in the shifting haze. Lifting the ladle, you poured bitter tea into the waiting cups, the steam curling lazily, a timid wisp reaching upward, blurring the sharp edges of reality. The warm breath of heat brushed your fingers, a small comfort brushing the chill settling along your spine. you returned to the bowls, smoothing the leveled rice with a gentleness that echoed your fragile heart. The corridor stretched long and narrow, shadows pooling like dark ink spilled on aged paper. A faint silhouette emerged, soft and indistinct, a slow pulse against the fading light. The paper screen shivered again, trembling like breath caught in a final hesitation. You let your gaze linger, the stillness folding into itself as uncertainty wrapped tight around your limbs. The weight of unseen eyes nudged your back, an unyielding presence threading through the silence. A breath escaped your lips, slow and deliberate, and your pulse slowed to meet the rhythm below the floorboards. You moved with precise quiet, inching closer to the threshold where the air thickened and shadows curled inward as though alive. The rough tatami beneath your feet absorbed your cautious steps, and every breath tasted faintly of smoke and iron, sharp and unforgiving. The faint scent wound its way into your senses, knitting a deeper knot of caution across your skin. The paper screen quivered once more, sliding an inch wider, thin as a whispered promise, torn between shadow and light. A secret drawn slow and deliberate at the edge of something waiting. Beyond the veil, the darkness deepened, thick and pulsing, breathing quietly against the fragile boundary between safety and the unknown. Your fingers trembled as you stepped forward, the slow scrape of cloth brushing the floor, echoing a fragile call. Time bent quietly, stretched to the breaking point by the weight of what lingered, unseen. A patient presence weaving itself into the fabric of the day. A cold shadow waiting with slow, inevitable patience. Then, just as the veil between worlds seemed poised to crack wide open, a faint glint caught your eye. A flash of something sharp, gleaming faintly in the half-light, almost lost beneath the pressing gloom. Your breath faltered, chest tightening as the darkness beyond. The screen stirred with a subtle promise. The room held its breath, caught between moments, waiting. And in that fragile silence, the fragile seam between what had been and what was to come began to straighten. A slow, deliberate thread tugged taut, pulling you forward toward the unknown. The faint flicker of light disappeared behind the paper screen as it swung shut, folding the corridor's shadows into a silent shroud. You remained motionless, every breath a shallow echo caught between the walls, silent, heavy with the lingering scent of burnt rice and the cold, elusive tang of metal that clung to the stale air like a secret. Your palm traced a slow, steady circle over the rough weave of the tatami beneath you, its coarse ridges pressing softly against your skin, grounding you. The muted daylight filtered weakly through the rice paper, casting wavering patterns like fading ink blots across worn wood and straw. You turned your attention back to the rows of porcelain bowls, lining them up with meticulous care. The cool surfaces trembled lightly beneath your fingertips, fragile as a whispered breath. The faint tap of porcelain clicking against the wooden plank dotted the room, a quiet, hypnotic rhythm, each sound drawing your senses inward and away from the shadows lurking just beyond the threshold. The room's stale breath felt heavy now, slow and deliberate, as if time had thickened to a molasses-like calm that pressed its weight into your bones. You dipped your hands once more into the cold basin, water running clear and steady, slipping through your fingers like liquid glass. The grains of rice slipped between your skin, smooth and unyielding, each movement a measured mantra, threading your thoughts with a fragile solace. The bitter scent of steeped tea curled softly on the thick air, mingling with that metallic whisper you couldn't quite place, pulling at the edges of your focus like a distant murmur. Inhaling slowly, you stepped back and flexed your aching shoulders beneath the loose sleeves, feeling the slow unraveling of tension knotting your spine. Yet every nerve remained alert, straining to catch the faintest hint, the whisper of cloth brushing a floor, the almost imperceptible shift of breath through the narrow slit between the sliding screens. The corridor seemed to draw in itself, walls folding inward like the closing petals of a flower, swallowing light and warmth with deliberate care. You reached instinctively for the worn knife resting on the counter, its dull metal edge bearing the scars of countless rituals. Faintly gleaming despite years of use, fingers curling around the handle, you lifted the soft cloth and began the slow, deliberate motion of sharpening. The blade slid steadily beneath the fabric's caress, each stroke a whispered vow against the silent dread stitching itself beneath your ribs. Long, fluid passes traced the length of the edge, smoothing away imperfections. The faint scrape between cloth and metal, a soothing undertone beneath the deeper thrum of your steadying breath. Outside the fragile sanctity of the kitchen, a distant bell chimed, low and mournful. Its ancient tones drifted lazily through the wooden corridors, stretching thin like a cautious exhale. The sound brushed your skin, a warm ember glowing momentarily in the cold stillness, offering a brief echo of reassurance before once again retreating into the steady hush. You felt it echo within you, a fragile pulse, threading warmth through the tightening dread gathering at the edges of your mind. You bent toward the rice bowls, fingertips ghosting across the smooth grains, spreading each with painstaking softness. The silence was punctuated only by the gentle clinking of porcelain, the rhythmic tapping, a delicate song weaving through the dense air. Beyond the paper screens, shadows stretched long and heavy, pooling like ink spilled on parchment, thickening with every breath you held. A subtle movement brushed at the corner of your sight, a slow, tentative rustle, thin as a sigh, Your gaze lifted sharply toward the corridor. The faint silhouette hovered at the far edge, its shape blurred, shifting shadow poised between light and darkness. The paper screen trembled once more, the thin fabric fluttering like a held breath, finally released. Every instinct froze your limbs, breath caught on the edge of your throat as the narrow space between safety and the unknown thinned dangerously. The air grew colder, sharper still, infused with the sting of smoke and iron, raw and unyielding. Brushing against the back of your throat, you inched forward, toes gliding silently across the tatami, the soft scrape of cloth brushing the floor, mingling with your steadying heartbeat. Light wavered, shadows folding and unfolding, like spectral waves that crept closer, swallowing the edges of the kitchen's fragile light. Your hands shook faintly, clutching the ladle beside the blackened kettle. You lifted it with slow resolve, pouring bitter tea into the waiting cups. Steam curled upward in lazy spirals, dissipating into the thick, motionless air, cool tendrils ghosting like silent watchers before vanishing. The warmth brushed your skin, a fleeting caress amid the shadow's cold embrace, grounding you in the ritual's delicate humanity. The figure beyond the screen hesitated, a slow, deliberate pulse in the darkness. The screen parted an inch more, revealing a hollow blackness, dense and waiting. Your breath stalled as a flash of pale metal gleamed faintly amid the gloom, a sliver of cold light reflecting against the muted wood. The moment stretched thin, hanging by a thread taut enough to snap. You felt the slow tightening coil of fate tightening behind your ribs, a quiet promise of upheaval yet to break the fragile peace. You remained still, suspended in the fragile silence, where everything seemed to lean toward the unknown. As the paper screen slid shut one last time, drawing a veil between the soft light of the kitchen and the cold, patient shadow waiting beyond the threshold, poised to slip through the narrow crack and change everything. The paper screen slid shut with a measured sigh, folding the corridor's shadows back into their silent refuge. The air in the kitchen felt still, heavy, with the quiet hum of a day finally unraveling. The scent of scorched rice lingered, less oppressive now, softened by the slow drift of bitter tea and that elusive hint of cold metal fading gently into the background. Your hands rested lightly on the edge of the basin, calm settling between your fingers as you breathed with deliberate ease. The tatami beneath your knees offered familiar roughness, a grounding pulse that measured each soft movement. Light filtered softly through the faded paper, casting a gentle wash of muted grays and warm browns that wrapped the room in a quiet embrace. The fragile rows of bowls waited patiently, almost holding their breath alongside you, their cold porcelain surfaces faintly warmed by the touch of the growing afternoon sun. Your fingers traced a slow circle over the worn straw mat, each ridge a reminder of the countless rituals that had passed here, quiet prayers etched into everyday moments. small acts of patience and presence. The cold water slipped calmly through your hands. One last time, each grain of rice rolling gently between your fingertips like smooth pebbles carried by a serene stream. The ritual, once burdened with dread, now felt like a thread woven back into the fabric of your own breath and being. Outside, the distant bell tolled softly, its weathered tones rolling through the estate like a lullaby whispered on the wind. The sound stretched and faded, slow and deliberate, marking not an end, but a new beginning, wrapped in the quiet. The corridor's shadows, once so menacing, now seemed to recede, folding into gentle shapes beneath the soft light. You could almost feel the Shogun's unseen gaze soften, watchful still, but without the heavy weight of suspicion that had poisoned the hours before. Your gaze rested on the rows of bowls, now arranged perfectly, each a silent testament to the small victories carved out in this quiet space. You bent slightly, fingers brushing the rice with tenderness, smoothing the surface as though laying to rest not just a meal, but the tension that had gripped you so tightly. The sharp scent of burnt grains gave way to a faint sweetness, as if the air itself had exhaled a long-held breath. The blackened kettle on the stove, once a silent sentinel of cold fires and restless nerves, now sat quietly, its surface cooling beneath the fading light. You lifted the ladle slowly, pouring bitter tea into waiting cups, the steam rising in gentle spirals, curling like soft mists retreating from early morning fields. The warmth brushed your skin, a delicate contrast to the chill that still lingered faintly beneath your sleeves. You straightened, feeling the slow unraveling of tension that had settled deep in your shoulders. Your heart's rhythm eased into a smooth, steady beat, steady as the faint creak of tatami beneath your cautious steps. The kitchen, your silent stage, held its breath one final time, then released it in a whisper. The shadows beyond the paper screen faded completely, dissolving into the solid warmth of afternoon light. The corridor stretched open and empty, no longer a narrow place of whispered threats, but a passage wide with the promise of quiet days. Ahead, the faint metallic tang that had haunted the air was gone, erased by patience and resolve, like ink washed clean by steady rain. Your eyes lingered on the worn knife resting on the counter, its edge now steady after your careful, deliberate sharpening. It caught the light gently, the blade less an instrument of fear and more a symbol of control reclaimed. Your fingers closed lightly around the handle, one last time. A silent farewell to the weight it bore. A soft breeze stirred the paper screens, carrying the distant scent of spring blossoms and fresh earth. It slipped through the open corridor, folding around you like a warm shawl, exhaling a promise of cycles completed and quiet mornings yet to come. You knelt a moment longer, feeling the rough weave of the tatami beneath your palms, each groove a reminder that this space, once a crucible of anxiety and sharp edges, could now cradle calm and renewal. The meal, painstakingly prepared and spared from shadowed hands, waited for its moment. An offering not only of sustenance, but of survival. The faint murmur of the estate's life stirred gently in the distance, a low hum of quiet footsteps mingling with the rustle of trees. The world beyond these walls moved on, patient, enduring, and so would you. With a final breath drawn deep and slow, you rose, the weight of the morning's tension peeling away like mist in the warm light. Your steps carried you softly from the kitchen, out toward the wider halls and open sky, each footfall a steady note in the soft symphony of calm restored. The day stretched long and serene beyond the shoji doors, a gentle light weaving gold into every shadow. The kitchen, once a stage for fear and suspicion, settled now into silence, a quiet refuge for the soul. As you step back to the room that held your quiet war, the air seems to pulse with a brittle peace. Fragile, yes, but yours, shaped by every steady breath and careful motion. The ritual no longer a curse, but a quiet hymn to endurance. And so, beneath the soft glow of afternoon light, the house waits, silent, patient, and sure. As you close the chapter, the weight of sharp edges eased, the burdens of shadow lifted away. Your breath slows, your hands relax, and the world softens. Here, at last in the fading light and gentle quiet, you find the fragile embrace of peace, a calm born from shadow, a rest well earned. Rest now, the day is done.